The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by guest chaplain Dr. Tony Foster from Restoration Worship Center, Greenwood, South Carolina.
Let us pray. Our gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this great nation that we have the honor to call home. Thank you for the blessings of this nation for 247 years. The Bible declares, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord's." Forgive us, Lord, as a nation, that we have not always lived up to your word or your ways. But nevertheless, the Bible declares in 2 Chronicles 7:14, "If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal the land." Only you, our God, through the power of your Spirit, can heal our land. I pray for our leaders today in the United States House of Representatives that we would become again one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair has examined the journal of last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal.
The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the journal stands approved.
And make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led today by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to welcome today's guest chaplain, Reverend Dr. Tony Foster of Restoration Worship Center in Greenwood, South Carolina. Dr. Foster, a personal friend of mine, has faithfully served in Christian ministry for more than 29 years. In that time, he has preached the gospel in the United States and around the world, ministering in the United Kingdom, Canada, India, and other countries. Pastor Foster is co-founder and co-pastor of Restoration Worship Center, which began in 2003 with just 25 members and the goal of being a place for the community to worship God while growing in their faith. He's partnered in ministry by his wife, Joni, who is watching from the gallery today. Pastor Tony and Joni have 2 sons, James and Trey. His ministry seeks to equip Christians to stand for righteousness in the nations of the world. Outside of the pulpit, Pastor Tony lives out his faith and his commitment to helping troubled youth become all God wants them to be by serving on the South Carolina Juvenile Parole Board. Dr. Foster also serves on the board of directors of Charter Institute at Erskine College, as well as president of Restoration Bible College. Most recently, he took another step to serve the community, being sworn in as a magistrate judge in Greenwood County, South Carolina. I'm proud to have Tony Foster here as the guest chaplain of the People's House. I'm grateful for his service to God and our country, and especially the youth of South Carolina. And I pray that God continues to bless him and his family in the state of South Carolina and the United States of America. And with that, I yield back.
The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the 118th Congress for restoring the oversight function of the House. Since winning the majority, House Republicans have held 565 oversight hearings, compelled Biden officials to testify 561 times, sent 862 letters to the administration, and issued 45 subpoenas. And we're just getting started. Our founders never intended for a president to be able to bypass Congress through executive action. like forgiving more than $400 billion in loan debt with the stroke of a pen. They never intended for a federal agency to be able to circumvent the people's representatives and use their regulatory authority to advance so-called progressive ideas. The judicial branch is doing its part to curb the rogue, often unconstitutional actions of this president, but the American people can count on this House, this half of the legislature, to conduct its critical oversight function just as our founders intended. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, Mr. Speaker, I want to lift the story of McClure, Pennsylvania native Susan Renninger, or as her family calls her, Sue. Sue is a loving mother and grandmother. She was diagnosed with lung cancer 6 years ago, yet she refused to let that hold her back. In the face of 3 rounds of chemo, 8 rounds of radiation, Sue, an avid traveler, completed a remarkable feat, seeing all 50 states. And she did not do it alone. Sue's children, Heather and Eric, her stepchildren, Kelly, Paula, Carla, often joined her, filling this difficult time with adventure, memories, and an abundance of love. Now her 9-year-old granddaughter wants to do the same. We as lawmakers have so much to learn from Sue, her resilience, her perseverance, her fight. We have an obligation to fight for the millions of Americans waging the battle with this devastating disease. And now, in the midst of this budget season, there's no better time to dedicate funds to beat cancer once and for all. That's why I'm advocating for more than $140 million in research to end cancer. Let's support research. Let's support screenings early and often. Let's win this fight for Sue and everyone in all 50 states. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in remembrance of Deb Slatton from Midway Township, who tragically passed away recently. Deb served honorably for both the Carleton and St. Louis County Sheriff's Department for 36 years, eventually retiring as a sergeant. She was the first female sheriff's deputy on patrol in Duluth and the department's first female sergeant in Duluth. Following her retirement, she continued to selflessly give her time and talents to our community as a member of the St. Louis County Sheriff's Volunteer Rescue Squad. This squad is one of the very best in the nation because of Deb and others' commitment to our region. Please take a moment to reflect on how precious life is and how critical these local heroes are to our communities. Rest in peace, faithful servant. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to sound the alarm about the extreme heat in Texas that is putting people's lives in danger. Workers in agriculture, construction, mail delivery, and landscaping are in danger and at risk for heat-related injuries or even death every day. Many workers in my district are working outside at a heat index that is well above 100 degrees. Heat is the #1 cause of weather-related deaths in the United States, more than floods, tornadoes, and hurricanes. Just last month, Felipe Pascual, a construction worker in the Houston area, collapsed on the job site and later died due to hypothermia. That is why I introduced the Construction Injury Prevention Act to provide paid 15-minute rest breaks for workers for every 4 hours. This bill puts people over profits. It puts people over politics and will literally save lives. We need to act to keep our workers safe, and we must act now. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to a good friend and dedicated public servant. Last week, Wayne Parker, Provo City's Chief Administrative Officer for 2 decades, announced his retirement. Having served with Mr. Parker for 8 years, I know firsthand how impossible it is to fully grasp the positive impact of Wayne Parker on Provo City. His touch for good can be found in everything we like about Provo. For many years, he's worked without fanfare or attention. Those of us that know his work best know that everything from our vibrant economy to our fun downtown and so much more have been blessed by Wayne's hard work and dedication to Provo City. Because of his great leadership skills, Wayne was awarded the 2020 Award for Career Excellence from the International City County Management Association. This award was recognition of Wayne's impact on the quality of life in Provo. I hope that his retirement brings joy and happiness, and those of us that call Provo home will never forget all he has done for us as a city. I know I will never forget all he has done for me. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate the birthday of Jackie Rhodes Adams. This week, our communities, Northern Manhattan and Harlem, celebrate Jackie, who is a powerhouse in Northern Manhattan and Harlem. Jackie is not only a union leader, but Jackie is also a community advocate. After tragically losing 2 of her sons to gun violence, Jackie co-founded Harlem's Mother Save, an organization dedicated to ending gun violence in our community, for which Jackie has worked tirelessly. She continues to be a force of change for our community, particularly advocating for young people. But let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker. Her voice is the window to her soul. She has a tremendous soprano voice, and everybody enjoys her singing in the community. So, Jackie, happy birthday, and continue singing. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. I extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, we worked a little late last night, but we voted to get rid of this left-wing, socialistic, woke agenda that has not only been crammed down the throats of the American people, but crammed down the throats of our military. That's right, we got rid of DEI and CRT, it's gone. Now we can get back to protecting the citizens of this country. We also are protecting the citizens of the unborn. We got rid of abortions that are paid for by taxpayers in our military. We did one more thing, Mr. Speaker. We gave those serving a needed pay raise and increased their lethality so that they can stay ahead of China. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to pass the NDAA today, hold the line, and negotiate, fight for this bill when it comes back from the Senate. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to discuss the epidemic of gun violence in America, which continues to inflict bloodshed and heartbreak on our communities. Last week, Americans were supposed to be celebrating the 4th of July, but big cities and small towns across the country were once again devastated by senseless gun violence. In October, my own Raleigh community joined the long line of American communities forever changed by a mass shooting. We should not have to live this way. While we took a momentous step forward last summer by passing bipartisan common sense reform, we must do more. I'm proud that the Raleigh Police Department is leading the charge through education, awareness, and prevention. June was Gun Violence Awareness Month, but the call for action shouldn't end then. Today and every day, we must work together to end gun violence once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in Committee of the Whole of the House of the State of the Union for further consideration of House Resolution 2670. Will the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for the further consideration of the bill H.R. 2670, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2024 for military activities of the Department of Defense and for military construction and for defense activities of the Department of Energy to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Thursday, July 13, 2023, Amendment Number 62, printed in House Report 118-142, offered by the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Burleson, had been disposed of. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 63, printed in House Report 118-142. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 63, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Banks of Indiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
This amendment would prohibit the use of funds to discriminate on the basis of race and ethnicity in admissions to the military service academies. Currently, all of the military service academies use race and ethnicity as selection criteria for admissions. Not only is this a violation of the Constitution, as recently affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court, it is a violation of the military's long-standing meritocratic principles. The military service academies are elite universities which train and educate the future leaders of our armed services. We need the best and the brightest, the most fit cadets and midshipmen, regardless of their skin color and ethnicity. To consider immutable characteristics like race and ethnicity as blatantly discriminatory. For our national security, we must uphold the ideals of our country and put hard work, dedication, and service above all. I reserve the remainder of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Washington rise?
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, Mr. Banks' amendment to prohibit our nation's service academies from promoting diverse experiences and backgrounds as part of its admissions policy will do nothing but weaken our military. The Supreme Court recently recognized in its decision to leave service academies out of its ruling on affirmative action that our academies are not laboratories for ideological gerrymandering. They are institutions that are foundational to our national security. Our service academies are responsible for providing a higher education, but also for training our nation's men and women to serve as global leaders. Many graduates will serve in the highest levels of our military and government, where success depends on maintaining an open mind, building diverse coalitions, and drawing on broad experiences. They will lead as part of a military that has never been more diverse, more capable, or more lethal. Soon, nearly half of our service members will be people of color, but only a fraction serve as officers, and even a smaller fraction as senior leaders. We learned bitter and painful lessons in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, when leaders neither understood nor looked like the formations they led. It's 2023, not 1952. If my colleagues across the aisle knew more about the painful history of this country, perhaps last night one of them would not have referred to black service members as colored people. Let's not move our country backwards. I oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
I'd like
to thank the gentleman from Indiana for introducing this amendment. I think it's a common sense amendment. Right now, there are all sorts of rumors out there that when people are admitted to the service academies, which after all are going to wind up running our military, the one part of our government that cannot fail, that preferences are being given and they're not always taking the best people that they can. I want to point out something that's a little bit offensive about this whole diversity thing. diversity for people like the Democrat Party, sadly, is solely determined by your genetics or your DNA or where your ancestors were 200 years ago. I'll give you an example to show the foolishness of it, and that the real goal here, I think, is to divide Americans. If I am 1/4 Peruvian, I can identify as Hispanic. I can identify as Hispanic despite the fact I've never spoke a word of Spanish and never been south of the border in my life. But the people who just want to divide America would say that I have a unique perspective growing up in a Milwaukee suburb, despite the fact that I am, 1/4 from a different part of the world. This is preposterous on its face, and it will inevitably lead to division as we are educating our military that they should look at people by where their ancestors came from, not as individuals. This true racism, which is what it absolutely is, because that's how they determine which silo you fit into, has got to be ripped away from our society and the military in particular. The idea that we have different viewpoints because of where our ancestors came from, despite the fact that we have not been there and know nothing of them, is preposterous. And like I said, in addition to the divisiveness, you're going to wind up with people who are not necessarily the best people to lead our military. Anybody familiar with military history knows the important decisions that have to be made during wartime. We want those decisions made by the brightest people we have, not by people who've been picked based upon where their DNA was 2,000 years ago. Thank you.
The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
I yield 1 minute to the ranking member of the Military Personnel Committee, Andy Kim.
Gentleman recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, I want to just start off by just responding to what was just said. It is absolutely important that we set straight that diversity does not mean we're talking about people who are less qualified. We're not talking about reducing standards. We're talking about having part of the decision recognize it is one part of many. So this is not a situation where it is the overriding factor. It is one part. We are still trying to, and I agree with what the Chairman Banks said, which is we want the best and brightest. But what we recognize when it comes to our service academies in particular is that this is a situation where we are trying to also build a force. This is not just about an individual. Yes, we want the best and brightest, but we also want the most cohesive and effective fighting force for our country. That we recognize we're building an entity where our service members are part of something bigger than all of them. I think about this brief that was put forward to the Supreme Court that laid out, this was written by former military officials that said the importance of maintaining...
Additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. They said, quote, the importance of maintaining a diverse, highly qualified officer corps has been beyond legitimate dispute for decades. History has shown that placing a diverse armed forces under the command of homogeneous leadership is a recipe for internal resentment, discord, and violence. This is written by former military leaders that are advising us to make sure that we let the military be able to control, be able to have the tools that they need to build the force that our country needs. And with that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield a minute and a half to a real American hero, Mr. Mass from Florida.
Gentleman from Florida recognized.
Thank you. I'm amazed at the bigoted comments I'm hearing from the other side right now. Literally stating that units need to look a certain way. There have to be people of certain colors in these units. It's purely idiotic. It's dangerous. War is not a game. It's always dangerous. It's very often deadly. I damn near gave my life for this country. And I can tell you the last thing that I cared about was the color of the snipers that had my back or the color of the medics that were putting tourniquets on each of my legs and my left arm when I was injured on the battlefield. It didn't matter if they were black, white, brown. None of that mattered when they were recruited into the military, and it didn't matter as they were serving. It has absolutely zero place, and you're literally putting the lives of our service members in danger by saying, this is concretely what you are saying, units need to look a certain way by color. And I just posed this quick question. I don't know how much time I have remaining, but I'll bet you all over there can't tell me what my background is. Am I part black, part brown, part white? What am I? yield time to you for a colloquy if you want to answer that. What am I?
To direct their comments to the chair.
Chair, I'll bet they can't tell me. I hear silence because they can't tell me, because you don't know what I am. You don't know that I'm half Mexican. You can't look at me and see that. But you believe that units should be made up of something that you can't see and that you can't ask about. Idiotic policy, dangerous for our service members, and they deserve better from the other side. I yield back.
Just a reminder, the comments are directed to be directed to the chair. The gentlewoman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to Vice Ranking Member of the House Armed Services Committee, Pat Ryan.
Gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank my colleague for his service. I rise as a proud graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and a representative of the Academy today. And whether my colleagues want to recognize it or not, particularly those on the far right, we have an increasingly, growingly diverse force. And as Mr. Kim said, unit cohesion, we can all agree, is essential and critical both in the heat of battle and in training and preparation. This amendment would unequivocally, as you heard from retired military officers across the board, weaken unit cohesion. And even the considerably, to be generous, conservative Supreme Court has recognized the distinct interests of these service academies in the recent decision that came down just a few weeks ago. We have made great strides at the academies with a focus and bipartisan commitment for decades. West Point has gone from 20% to 36% cadets of minority backgrounds, Naval Academy 19% to 37%, but we still have work to do to achieve unit cohesion. I'm out of time and yield back.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time to myself to close.
Recognized.
This amendment is simple. It ensures our military service academies are in line with the Supreme Court's recent decision on the unconstitutionality of race-based affirmative action, and it strives to uphold the ideals of meritocracy, which is nowhere more important than in the United States military. I urge all members to support it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have remaining?
1 minute.
All right, Mr. Chair, I yield myself the remainder of time. Today's military leaders are unequivocal in their support of diversity in leadership. Joint Chiefs Chairman Maley considers it fundamental. Army Chief McConville calls it crucial competitive advantage. Then Air Force Chief C.Q. Brown called diversity an imperative. And Marine Corps Commandant Berger said, the core of America's strength lies in its diversity. And the very government assembled here today, in its amicus brief to the Supreme Court, characterized a diverse pool of Academy graduates as a vital interest in which the nation's future depends. The American people expect and demand that our academies are given every tool and advantage to train leaders capable of fighting and winning our nation's wars. And make no mistake, diversity is not synonymous with less qualified. We want the best. We want the brightest. We need the most diverse. This amendment attempts to weaken a concept foundational to our current and future military supremacy, that diversity translates into capability and lethality. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
Thank you. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Excuse me? For what purpose is the gentlelady from Washington being recognized?
Now that I'm recognized, I ask for a recorded vote.
Record has been, and pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 64, printed at House Report 118-142. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 64, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Roy of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chair. We have spent the better part of the last several days making clear to the American people that this side of the aisle wants to see a Defense Department that is focused on its core mission, defending the United States of America, rather than divvying us up by race and dividing us and separating us. I rise today to ensure that the Department of Defense is focused on its core mission rather than pursuing the political agenda of climate change to the detriment of the national security of the United States. In 2021, Department of Defense spokesman John Kirby refused to say that China is a bigger national security threat to the United States than climate change. He called them, quote, equally important, and said it doesn't do any good to make a relative, quote unquote, assessment of national security issues. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said climate change is an existential threat to our nation's security. Next week, Secretary of State John Kerry literally travels to China to discuss climate change, not China's increased aggression against Taiwan, not its expansion in the Pacific, not its oppression of its people, not the fact that they produce 2 new coal-fired plants per week on top of the 1,100 they have, while we undermine our national security to pursue the climate fetish agenda of the other side of the aisle. President Biden's executive orders have served as the catalyst for massive reforms at the Department of Defense that compromise national security to advance this climate fetish. The amendment that I offer would prohibit any of the funding in the National Defense Authorization Act, or that flows from that authorization, from being used to carry out President Biden's executive orders on climate change. The Department of Defense's Climate Adaptation Plan includes radical proposals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the expense of our warfighting capabilities. According to the plan, DoD has identified climate change as, quote, a critical national security issue. It mandates, quote, environmental justice, because why miss an opportunity to push divisive ideology? The DoD says it will transition to 100% carbon-free electricity, meaning America's war machine will literally depend on the wind and the sun. No one, including anyone on this side of the aisle, believes that we shouldn't pursue every advantage in technology to harness energy. No one. In Texas, we've embraced wind, we've embraced solar. But to our detriment, when we have interfered with the market and interfered with the ability of us to have energy at our disposal and at our demand. We undermine our grid. We undermine our national security. We undermine reliability. We cause energy prices to go up. And in this case, in the context of the National Defense Authorization Act, we should not be pursuing this politically motivated climate fetishization that undermines our national security. I reserve.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I'm just going to make 3 quick points here. First of all, it's interesting. You can go back to 2008 and look at John McCain's campaign and even entertainingly Sarah Palin's vice presidential statements about how climate change was an existential threat. And this was a bipartisan issue where we talked about why this was a significant challenge that we needed to address. Well, then, of course, Barack Obama had the audacity to get elected president and pursue that agenda, so suddenly it became political. And I just want to make this very, very clear, that the belief here is that digging up fossil fuels from below the ground and burning them is bad for life. It's bad for the planet, and will eventually exterminate the planet. So, now, if you want to disagree with that, you want to have a little argument about whether or not that's true, we can. I mean, the overwhelming majority of scientists seem to agree with that. But let's hear the argument. But it just kills me to sit here and listen to the other side claim that this is a political agenda. Now, I understand why they do that, because that skips past the messy part of where you have to actually argue the facts. And you can just dismiss it as politics, and everyone robotically goes, oh, yeah, it's politics, that's bad, we can't have that. But if we can have an actual discussion about this, if you believe, as the administration does, and as again, I don't know, 80% of the scientists believe, that climate change could destroy the frickin' planet, then it's worth saying that that's a national security threat, at least equivalent to China. Yes, there is the possibility of global nuclear war with China that could exterminate the planet. But climate change, the argument is, would exterminate the planet. So I think that's worth thinking about, all right? Please believe me when I say this is not a political agenda. It is a heartfelt belief that we have a distinct problem here that needs to be addressed. Second, how to address it. Come up with alternative sources of energy and make those investments. And this is also very important because even if this wasn't destroying the planet, our dependency upon oil has been problematic, all right? And I know there's this fantasy that we're going to become energy independent. Nobody's energy independent. Oil is a global marketplace. Even if we generate enough energy, we sell it overseas. And Saudi Arabia and OPEC, therefore, has an enormous amount of control over that market. And as I've said over and over again, the true answer to this problem is, when gas prices go up, wouldn't it be great to say, that's wonderful, but we don't need that. We have other sources of energy to go to. And nothing is more important in the military than energy and access to it, all right? Wars are started over having access to the energy that you need. So to say that this isn't involved in national security literally hurts my brain, all right? You need these alternatives. And the last argument is on this market. Well, let the market decide. The market subsidized the living hell out of the oil industry for 175 years. So they have an enormous advantage. The pipelines, the system, the entire thing that was built on our taxpayer dollars. So now what we're saying is if we're going to develop an alternative to that, then we're going to have to help that, as we help nuclear energy, a whole bunch of other different things. I don't think I hear the other side complaining about the government subsidizing nuclear energy because that fits within their politics. So if I ask nothing else, could we please just have a rational discussion that understands that this is a legitimate policy issue? It isn't a fetish. It isn't a political debate. It's the fate of the planet and how we manage energy policy, both of which, and I'm going to take a real bold step here, actually impact national security. I believe that they do, and I believe that anybody would agree with that statement. So please, defeat this amendment. I reserve whatever time I have left.
Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Well, I appreciate my colleague for basically making the case for the very climate fetish that I describe. When he talks about the need for energy and its existence for national security, my point is having reliable energy. We have to have energy that is available and reliable and dependable. That's the whole point. And my colleague talks about nuclear power. Great. I'm waiting with bated breath for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to embrace and promote and push non-carbon producing nuclear power. We haven't generated a new nuclear power plant since when? What, the 1970s? Georgia isn't even off the ground because of federal regulation and interference. The fact is, we are subsidizing and promoting unreliable wind and solar while subsidizing the hell out of electronic vehicles, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to use the Defense Department to continue to promote it, which is engaged in crony capitalism to enrich a small handful of elitists on the back of hardworking American people while we subsidize China and make ourselves reliable on China for their minerals and what they produce. It is absolutely astonishing that we would turn over our national defense capability to China at this point in time to pursue this radical agenda. I yield back.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I will just note that we are making investments in nuclear power. It's really expensive and it's difficult to develop, but the investments are being made. That is part of the agenda. And with that, I would yield the balance of my time to Mr. Garamendi.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I'm actually quite amazed that we're allowing a political ideology to get in the way of reality and facts. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. military, more than a decade ago, noticed that the climate was changing and they needed to address it. Also, the fact is that the largest solar and wind energy systems in the nation are in Texas. And Texas is dependent upon those for their power when the heat wave arrives. Let's be smart here. Let's not let ideology and the fact that we want to get into a fight over climate change get in the way of good public policy. It's absolutely essential that the military build for the future, that they build for resiliency. And I'm out of time, so I yield back.
It's a quick minute. Time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
What?
The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. The chair understands that amendment number 65 will not be offered. It is now in order to consider amendment number 66, printed in House Report 118-142. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 66, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Davidson of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Chairman. The amendment I've offered would prevent the Department of Defense from purchasing data that would otherwise require a warrant, court order, or subpoena. The amendment would also end unauthorized surveillance practices. The government is currently circumventing the Fourth Amendment by purchasing location data, internet browsing data, and other sensitive information. The so-called data broker loophole is a severe threat to the right to privacy in the United States. Freedom surrendered is rarely reclaimed, but we must defend our Fourth Amendment. Government surveillance programs are routinely misused and targeted at Americans. The FBI, in fact, admits it conducted 278,000 improper searches of American citizens in 2020 alone. If the government can buy its way around the Fourth Amendment, there will be few meaningful limits on government surveillance. We need to pass this amendment. It at least stops the Department of Defense from doing that inside the United States of America. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition? Oh, I'm sorry. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
People get us confused all the time. It's okay. I ask unanimous consent to claim time in opposition to the amendment, though I'm not opposed to the amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank the gentleman for offering the amendment. Ubiquitous commercial data collection and bulk data sales represent a privacy concern for all Americans. Companies and governments alike have access to once unimaginable amounts of user data through commercial channels. This development and the Fourth Amendment questions that come with it deserve full consideration. I look forward to working with the gentleman on this amendment to ensure that these issues are addressed in a manner that does not unduly burden the Department of Defense relative to the rest of the federal government while ensuring its operational needs are met. I think Congress will spend a substantial amount of time on the privacy concerns addressed by this amendment in the coming months, and I welcome that discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I appreciate the support of my colleagues to get this amendment to this point, and frankly, the commitment to the work ahead. It's important for our national security, but the whole premise of the Department of Defense is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So the way we go about it has to preserve the way of life that our Constitution establishes, that the Bill of Rights guarantees that our protections will exist, and we have a lot of work to do to restore the protections of our Fourth Amendment. This amendment is an important first step, and I ask all of our colleagues to unite and make it a fully bipartisan level of support. And I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The chair understands that amendment number 67 will not be offered. The chair understands that amendment number 68 will not be offered. The chair understands that amendment number 69 will not be offered. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to HRS 583, I offer amendments en bloc.
The clerk will designate the amendments en bloc.
En bloc consisting of amendments numbered 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 26, 29, 36, 37, 38, 39, 42, 43, 44, 53, 54, 60, 65, 67, 68, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, and 80. Printed in House Report Number 118-142, offered by Mr. Rogers of Alabama.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, each will control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to yield 30 seconds to my friend and colleague from Iowa, Mr. Nunn.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a nearly 20-year combat veteran and head of counterintelligence for cyber, I know firsthand the millions of threats that are leveraged against our country on a daily basis. As we look to strengthen our security with this bill offered by the chair and the amendment going forward, I want to thank those who have worked so diligently on our joint effort to create a National Digital Reserve Corps to buttress our country against this threat. Additionally, I want to speak about another win for our military parents. As both an Air Force officer, reservist, and Guards member, we have worked on bipartisan legislation in the Reserve Component Parental Leave Parity Act that I helped lead with Representative Jeff Jackson from North Carolina. Our servicemen and women deserve time with their new children, and this policy would expand parental leave for our drilling Reserve and National Guard member.
Has expired.
An additional 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
To be able to match the leave of their active duty members. This is a big bipartisan win to improve the lives of our members who are serving, including myself as a parent of foster children. Unfortunately, as a result of a backroom deal, we were not able to serve those who needed help from suicide prevention. In my home state of Iowa, we have almost 4 times the number of individuals who take their life after coming back from combat. We will not stop fighting for this, and while we can't include in this amendment, we will move forward with the chairman to make sure that we are able to protect those who have served it overseas and take their own life when coming back. With that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
For the gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, moving the National Defense Authorization Act forward has almost always been a bipartisan effort. This very bill, as originally drafted, passed out of committee with near unanimous votes from both Democrats and Republicans, 59-1. That's why it's unconscionable that extremist politicians are willing to jeopardize our military readiness and our national security to push their unpopular partisan agenda. In the dead of night, extreme lawmakers tacked on divisive, dangerous amendments, including one that would prevent servicewomen from accessing critical abortion care. More than 400,000 women serve on active duty in the armed forces and in the reserves. At great personal sacrifice, these servicewomen have sworn an oath to defend the United States and to live, train, and work at assigned duty stations often far from home. Almost immediately after Roe was overturned last summer, states around the country began enacting draconian abortion bans and restrictions. Today, nearly half of servicewomen no longer have access to abortion care. Many live hundreds of miles from the nearest provider. Access to abortion should not depend on where someone lives or where they are stationed. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin rightly noted that the Dobbs decision would, quote, would interfere with the U.S. military's ability to recruit, retain, and maintain the readiness of a highly qualified force, unquote, and announced earlier this year that the DoD would cover travel and lodging expenses for servicewomen and military family members forced to travel for health care. But the colleagues on the other side of the aisle would see that this policy is overturned. Now, I have voted for the NDAA every year that I have served in Congress, but I cannot in good conscience vote for this legislation in its current form. We must provide for a national defense, but this bill will egregiously harm nearly 1/5 of this country's fighting force, and I will not turn my back on our servicewomen and military families. I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to my friend from California, Mike Garcia.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this historic NDAA. I rise in support of the strong NDAA. It prioritizes the true mission of our U.S. military, and that's to deter and to win wars. That's it. It's pretty simple. And more specifically, it prioritizes America's greatest national security asset, our brave men and women in uniform who serve on a daily basis. And I want to thank Chairman Rogers for his support of my amendment within this en bloc that will secure the highest pay raise in history for nearly 1 million of our junior enlisted troops, paid for by the appropriations bill. This takes a starting salary for an E1 in the military from about $22,000 a year to $31,200 a year. It gets them above the poverty line, off of food stamps. And these brave men and women are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our freedom, and it's unacceptable that they were making less than fast food workers. I couldn't be more proud of this historic victory, and I couldn't be more eager, Mr. Speaker, to continue fighting for those who fight so hard to give us our security blanket. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to an outstanding freshman member, Mr. Van Orden from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman is
Chairman.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in opposition of Amendment 875 of the en bloc. I have tremendous respect for Chairmans Green and Rogers, and I also view the Chinese Communist Party as a threat to world peace. With that said, I believe the unintended consequences of this amendment will have a greater negative financial impact on our junior enlisted servicemen who shop at our base exchanges than on the Chinese Communist Party. Our junior enlisted currently struggle financially, and the implementation of this amendment will unintentionally raise the cost of everyday goods and further exacerbate this strain. For this reason alone, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to my friend from Texas, Mr. Jackson.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to start by saying, despite the objections of many of the other, folks on the other side of the aisle regarding this National Defense Authorization Act, which I consider to be an outstanding bill that I'm aggressively and enthusiastically supporting, despite the objections on the other side of the aisle, most of the controversial amendments in this amendment do nothing but return us to the initial and the long time combat readiness attitude that the military has always had, and focusing all of our efforts on that particular goal. But I want to rise also in support of the en bloc, and this en bloc includes an amendment of mine which will prohibit cadets or midshipmen from being punished for not receiving the COVID vaccine. An adverse action documented in a member's service record can have a devastating impact, potentially ending a rising military career before it even has an opportunity to begin. Last year, here on the floor of the House, Ranking Member Smith told us that another vaccine mandate could be implemented in the future if the Biden administration decided to do so. I refuse to sit on the sidelines and let the Biden administration's politically motivated efforts to appease the radical left cost young men and women their futures. And with that, I strongly urge support of the overall NDAA, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I continue to reserve. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This time I'd like to yield 1 minute to my friend from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise both in appreciation and support of my amendment, including the en bloc, which will require a study to identify potential vulnerabilities in U.S. military systems and infrastructure that could be exploited by adversarial AI applications used by China, Russia, and other adversaries. I also want to thank the chairman for his leadership and this House for supporting a number of amendments that were included and adopted yesterday. They go on to support military families and their children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, ensure the DoD guarantees full access and coverage of life-saving opioid overdose reversal drugs, and requires our nation's biodefense strategy, along with helping the Army meet its goals to modernize aircraft and more. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I extend my appreciation and yield back.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
We have no further speakers. If the gentleman would like to close.
Minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I just want to take this moment, and I will have remarks in a moment while regrettably I'm not supporting this particular bill. But that doesn't change how much respect I have for the process and for all the people who participated in that process. And I want to make sure we understand that. That's always one of the things I always say. I believe in democracy more than I believe in my own opinion, which means that the process is important and the way we put that process together and that we move through it. And in particular, I definitely want to thank the staff, certainly our staff on the House Armed Services Committee that's done an outstanding job, the Rules Committee staff as well, but also the floor staff and the parliamentarians and all the folks who have to put the amendments together and put the legislation together. Throughout this process, from the very start, when the original bill was introduced to all of the amendments, and we've run through these numbers, it's in the thousands, basically, of amendments and ideas that are submitted from the moment we put together the initial bill, we amended it in committee, they deal with rules, they amended on the floor. We're talking literally thousands of different pieces of legislation and ideas that have to be brought together. And we members don't do any of that. We spout out the ideas, and a whole bunch of staff work really hard to get that done. And I thank you very, very much for all of that work to make this process go forward. And also, it is a good, robust, bipartisan approach. We have the amendments, we have the debates, we resolve it. And one thing I want to make clear, I'm not thrilled with the outcome of the Rules Committee, but that's the nature of being in the minority. When you're in the majority, the Rules Committee does what the Rules Committee does, and the minority complains about it. That's the way this place works, and that's fine, okay? I might have done it differently in terms of trying to figure out how to pass the bill, but at the end of the day, I don't have any process objection here. The amendments were put on the floor, and they passed. So I'm not concerned about that. I am concerned about the outcome. And I will explain that later. But I just wanted to take a moment to really make it clear how much I thank all the people who put this process together, and in particular to thank Chairman Rogers for his work as committee chairman. I yield myself an additional 30 seconds. Pull this together, and it's not as easy as it looks. Let me just sum that up. So, a whole lot of things you gotta manage there, including the minority party. And I think Mike has done an outstanding job of doing that in his first year as chair. I appreciate that, and I respect that, and I thank everybody for the process they put together. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
I'm going to close. Do you want to?
Not closing yet, so you should reserve.
Okay, I reserve then. Yeah.
Thank you. And with that, I yield.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you. I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, a member of the committee, Ms. Houlihan.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later today, I will offer the motion to recommit on this bill. I stand with my colleagues who have stood shoulder to shoulder in support of our brave service members in an effort to put together this bill for the last nearly a year. I stand with the spirit of those who are currently serving in uniform, who are sick and tired of this legislative body politicizing their lives, their livelihoods, and their bodily autonomy. I rise today in honor of my grandfather and my father, who served full, distinguished careers in the military, and my mom and my grandmother, who served as military spouses, each for over 30 years. I rise today as someone who was born and grew up on a military base and moved across this nation and to other countries. And I rise as someone who raised my own hand and my own child when the time came. And I rise for my cousins who serve today. I don't need my colleagues to tell me what it's like to be a mom in uniform. I lived that experience. Or a child in the military. I lived that too. So here I am today, standing up on behalf of all servicewomen and military families who are willing to risk their lives for our freedoms. And yet we are not willing to protect theirs. What I have seen over the floor in the past 2 days has really saddened me. Targeting LGBTQ families like my own, targeting libraries, targeting the reproductive freedoms of servicewomen and military families stationed in states that do not respect their own bodily autonomy. Chair, we even saw a colleague refer to our black service members as colored people. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, let me make a few things clear. We agree there are threats around the world like China that we should be spending our time and efforts on. We agree the historic recruitment challenges we face are a risk to our national security. We agree the brave men and women who serve in uniform should not be used as political pawns. So why? Why did this Republican-led body decide to take a historically bipartisan piece of legislation from the House Armed Services Committee hostage by adding scores of extreme GOP culture war priorities to it, including, least of all, clear as day, a backdoor policy to a national abortion ban? Chair, I want the American people to know that Democrats support our men and women in uniform. We proudly voted forward a bipartisan piece of legislation to increase their pay, to improve their housing, to expand their access to child care, 58-1. But the GOP is putting that bipartisan progress in jeopardy, and the toughest part is that they know it. I have a great deal of respect for the handful of my colleagues who recognize the extreme turn that this legislation has taken, and I thank them. And so I look at them again, and I look to them again. We must do what is right by our service members, put the political gamesmanship aside, and return this extreme bill back to committee where it can return it to its bipartisan nature. I will work tirelessly across the aisle to ensure that we give the President and our nation, and in fact our globe, a bill that truly provides for the collective defense of our American values. It really saddens me to say that this bill does not do that. This bill will hurt our recruitment and retention, and it makes it extremely difficult for our proud veterans.
Has expired.
The gentlelady, an additional 30 seconds.
A proud veteran like myself and so many others to look at future leaders of America and say that, yes, this military is a home for you. I took the uniform nearly 30 years ago, and it's a travesty that servicewomen today will have less freedoms than I did. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this MPTR, send this extreme bill back to committee where we can truly deliver for those in uniform. Thank you, Chair, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. And I think the gentlelady from Pennsylvania summed it up reasonably well, but I really want to make sure people understand why we're opposed to this bill. We are opposed to this bill because it is our firm belief that this will undermine our ability to meet the national security objectives of this country. And I want to explain why. We can start with the issue of access to reproductive health care for women. Because of the Dobbs decision, there are many states now across this country where you cannot get access to that care. The Department of Defense, faced with that, having a large number of women and family members of service members in those states, set up a situation to allow those women to get access to that reproductive care. This bill takes that away. So if you are a woman concerned about your ability to get an abortion, first of all, or concerned about if you're a service member who has a family member who might be concerned about that, you are going to be less likely to join the military. And I really do want to emphasize one point that came up during this. And I understand a lot of people oppose abortion. They want to ban it outright, and that's why they feel this way. But do understand the negative impact that will have on a lot of women's willingness to join the military. And it goes beyond abortion, as we have sadly seen. And the worst case of this is a woman who miscarriages midway through her pregnancy cannot get treated for that. There was one particular case that was cited during the debate of a woman who wound up in the emergency room fighting for her life because of an infection because she could not get that care. So if you are a woman, or if you are a man who is considering, well, what about my spouse? What about my children? You will be less likely to join the military knowing that you have that challenge. So we are going to have fewer qualified people willing to join the military because of what was passed. That will not make our military stronger. We have also now said, the debate seems to imply, that trans people don't exist, so they are not welcome in the military either. Now, I am not a doctor and therefore don't want to presume what treatment someone should have who is in a transgender situation, but what this bill says is, nope, we're not even going to consider it. So again, if you are a trans person, you're going to be less likely to join the military. Or if you're just someone who thinks, well, what if I have a child who's a trans person? The military is not going to accept them. So now you can take trans people off the table. They're not going to join the military either. And then we have the most difficult aspect of this, and that is the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. And this is a very widely misunderstood thing, and I tried to explain it throughout the debate. We, believe it or not, have a history of discrimination in this country. We have a history of bigotry. You can go through slavery and Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan and a whole bunch of different things. We also have a history of incredible discrimination against women. I cited this before, but as it came out during debate, women who join the military, I think, have a very strong understanding. They're going to have to work twice as hard, basically, to get the same opportunities that a man gets in the military. That's sort of understood. And because of that historical discrimination, you also have to wonder, if you are a person of color, if you're going to get a fair shake in the military. Now, I will admit, there are a lot of people that even faced with those odds, even knowing that they're going to have to work twice as hard and face that discrimination, they will join. But some will not. So again, there's another group of people that we've now taken off the table. I want to take a special moment to recognize on that last point of the willingness of people to join the military, even if they're facing discrimination. Where I live, in the Seattle-Bellevue area, we have a lot of Nisei veterans and family of Nisei veterans. And it's a particularly compelling story. These are Japanese Americans who fought and died, in many cases, for our country during World War II, while their family members were unfairly incarcerated back home. So I know that there are people who will step up and take on that challenge anyway, but there will be fewer of them. So basically, you've got this huge group of people now that are going to be less likely to join the military because of what this bill does. And now I will, I think, slightly paraphrase a line from A Few Good Men. Basically, all this bill does is weakens our country. It weakens our ability to respect all of the people who should be allowed to serve, not just to serve, but to serve with an equal chance at advancement. Whether you're talking about women, whether you're talking about trans people, whether you're talking about people of color, this bill says that we're going to make it more difficult for you to get a fair shake in the military. And I do understand the DEI argument. But let me just say two things about that as I bring this to a close. First of all, there were a lot of very disturbing arguments made. I think the base renaming commission argument, even though technically it really didn't matter, was the most disturbing at all. As we once again heard all these speeches about how we need to honor our history and honor our heritage. The exact same arguments that were made over 100 years ago when this country went through a very concerted effort to make sure that we could establish white supremacy as the law of the land. The very same arguments that erected these monuments and named these bases and gave us the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow were made on the floor of this House. Now, it's shocking that those arguments were made. It is appalling that those arguments carried the day and actually won on all of these amendments and found themselves inserted in the bill. So all of that is very concerning. I do understand that there is a different set of arguments, and a very respectable set of arguments, that says that the way we are attempting to address the historical discrimination in this country is problematic. And that is primarily critical race theory. And there are certainly some in this country who have a view of this, that our country is nothing but racist. And that basically, and we've heard, I think Mike Waltz actually read this out in committee, and it's very accurate. There are some who believe that all white people are racists, that if you're a white person, you are by definition an oppressor, and you need to think about that. I've seen that, I've witnessed that, it's wrong, okay? In my opinion, it is not the correct way to approach that. So how should we handle that? Well, the way we have chosen to handle that is to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion completely and totally. And that's the problem. If you wanted to say, we're not going to do that part of it, fine, but that's not what we did. And to the argument of, well, gee, all that does is that makes it fair. We shouldn't consider race. We shouldn't consider any of these things in determining excellence. The problem is, for 400 years, we did. And now, at the end of that, after all of the advantages that one particular group of people got, we're going to say it's going to be spared. I apologize. I urge opposition to this bill, though I do thank the people for the process that was put in place. Thank you.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank our bipartisan HASS staff for their tremendous work. As I talked about yesterday, our committee staff has worked for months, long hours, in a very bipartisan fashion to get us where we are today. I also want to thank everyone from the Office of Legislative Counsel, the Congressional Budget Office, the Parliamentarian's Office, the clerk, the floor staff, the Rules Committee, and leadership on both sides of the aisle. I especially want to thank my friend, Ranking Member Smith, for his hard work and assistance. As a longtime former chairman of this committee, he gets the ebbs and flows of this process and has been a very helpful partner in helping me lead this committee. Mr. Chairman, this is a good bill. I'm going to address this to my conference. There is absolutely no reason why any Republican should vote against this bill. It will enhance the congressional oversight of the DOD, it will improve the quality of life for our service members and their families, and it will help build the ready, capable, and lethal fighting force we need to deter the Chinese Communist Party and other adversaries. I urge all members to support the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendments en bloc offered by the gentleman from Alabama. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The en bloc amendments are agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 118-142, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 63 by Mr. Banks of Indiana. Amendment number 64 by Mr. Roy of Texas. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes from the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 63 printed in House Report 118-142 by the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 63, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Banks of Indiana.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number have risen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the
Ms. Waters. Ms. Waters votes no. Ms. Perez. Ms. Perez votes aye. Mr. Huffman. Mr. Huffman votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 218, the nays are 210. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 64, printed in House Report 118-142 by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 64, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Roy of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device, and members, this is a 2-minute vote. Members, you now have 1 minute.
This vote, the yeas are 217, the nays are 216. The amendment is adopted. There being no further amendments under the rule, the committee rises. The whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 2670 and proceeded to House Resolution 583. I report that the bill as amended by House Resolution 582 by the House on July 13, 2013 was Sunday. Its further amendment adopted in the committee as a whole.
I gotta get my cheaters on. The chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2670 and, pursuant to House Resolution 583, reports the bill as amended by House Resolution 582 and by the House on July 13, 2023, back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. In a separate vote demanded on any further amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the chair will put them in gross. The question is on the adoption of the amendments. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2024 for military activities of the Department of Defense and for military construction, and for defense activities of the Department of Energy, to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members, take your conversations off the floor. This House will be in order. I don't even see him. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek its recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Houlihan of Pennsylvania moves to recommit the bill H.R. 2670 to the Committee on Armed Services.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
For the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Members, this is a 5-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this is a 5-minute vote on the motion to recommit, and will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of the bill if ordered. We're not on. And agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal if ordered. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 210, the nays are 217. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The gentleman from Alabama, nays. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Members, you have 2 minutes.
On this vote, the yeas are 219 and the nays are 210. The bill is passed without objection, and motion to reconsider this is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the journal stands approved. Thank you.
Seek recognition. Do you want to quiet everyone down? For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent the clerk be authorized to make technical corrections in the engrossment of H.R. 2670, including corrections in spelling, punctuation, section and title numbering, gross referencing, conforming amendments to the table of contents, and short titles, and the insertion of appropriate headings. Thank you. Am I done? Come on, Dawson.
No, I'm saying we don't need that.
Thank y'all.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at noon on Monday, next for morning hour debate, and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection, so ordered. House will be in order. Please remove your conversations from the floor. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate today's passage of the fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act. In addition to making critical investments in our military, this legislation takes significant steps to protect the United States from CCP spying. For 16 years, CCP-owned logistics platform called LOGINC has tracked our commercial and military ships. This NDAA deters CCP aggression by enacting my plan to ban the DoD's use of LOGINC and working with our partners to ban it too. The CCP is spying on American citizens across every industry, field, and institution. Congress must act to shore up vulnerabilities to the CCP, especially when it comes to our military and commercial supply chains. This NDAA does just that. That is why I was proud to support it, and that is why I urge all our Senate colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House in 1 minute, revised and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the importance of preventative cancer care, especially colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer is one of the deadliest cancers, but it has one of the highest survival rates if detected and treated early. Too many Americans put off routine screenings and colonoscopies because they worry about coverage. Now, United Healthcare has made this disastrous decision to require patients to get prior authorization before they get colonoscopies. Their new policy comes at a time when colorectal cancer rates are rising nationwide, particularly in young Americans. This policy encourages more Americans not to get screenings and colonoscopies, and it will cause curable cancers issues to become life-threatening ones. I lost my father, Congressman Donald Payne Sr., to colorectal cancer in 2012. I do not want other families to lose their fathers and loved ones from a lack of preventative cancer care. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks as necessary.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Washington has a spending problem. I know it, you know it, and more importantly, the American people know it. Our addiction to unaccountable spending has resulted in our nation accumulating more than $32 trillion in debt, leading to crippling inflation and a financial burden that future generations will struggle to overcome. That is why I have introduced the Principles-Based Balanced Budget Amendment, which will require annual spending and revenue to balance and will affirm the principle of fiscal responsibility through constitutional mandate. If ratified, this constitutional amendment would require Congress to balance the budget within 10 years while still allowing Congress to determine which mechanisms of how to achieve that balance through statute. Under the Constitution, Congress holds both the power of the purse and the responsibility of the purse. Let us fulfill that responsibility with a strict measure of accountability. I urge my colleagues to support this effort to affirm the principles of fiscal responsibility through constitutional mandate. Our financial future in America depends on it. We must act now. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today, yet I am tired. I'm tired of having to come down to the well of this chamber to mourn the needless death of another child. I'm tired of gun violence being the leading cause of death among our precious children. And finally, I am tired of my colleagues across the aisle, when presented with an opportunity to do something about these tragedies, they do nothing. I'm disgusted that so few have health resources for our young people. Passed this body just 2 years ago in a bipartisan. Now, Republican sense of bipartisanship and even caring for the lives of others has vanished. Mr. Speaker, I must confess I am tired of marching down here to demand something that should have belonged to these children from the very beginning, their sense of safety. I may be tired, but I will not stop. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of a fellow Georgian, Charles T. Carmichael, Sr. An avid basketball player, Charles was the Georgia Player of the Year in high school before being recruited by South Georgia College to play basketball with them. He continued his love of the sport through adulthood, playing for the Golden Boys and winning the Georgia State title 12 times. The owner and operator of Dalton Auction Company, Charles loved working with people and connecting them to treasures. He was a scoutmaster in the Boy Scouts, where he mentored hundreds of young minds and supported 31 scouts in reaching Eagle Scout status. In his personal life, Charles was also an active teacher in his church, where he served as a ruling elder, deacon, and member of over 5 decades. His friends and family described him as a gentle giant with endless patience and a true family man, always there for those who needed him most. He will be missed dearly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to request unanimous consent to address the House and to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the life of Mrs. Ella LaJoy Sojourner Fowler, a devoted mother, loving wife, community leader, and inspiring mentor. Ms. Fowler sadly passed away on July 5th at the age of 83. Born in Mississippi, Mrs. Fowler moved to Akron as a child, where she attended Akron Public Schools and eventually graduated from John R. Buchtel High School. Mrs. Fowler shared a passion for improving the health of our communities that was expressed through an illustrious nursing career, caring for Northeast Ohioans at Barberton Citizens Hospital and City Hospital. In 1961, Mrs. Fowler married Pastor Dr. Ronald J. Fowler, and together they built up the Arlington Church of God. Mrs. Fowler was actively engaged in the life and the work of the church, serving over the years as a member of the choir, a Sunday school teacher, a member of the medical board, a deaconate board, as well as First Lady for 39 years. Mrs. Fowler's faithfulness, grace, and kindness was an inspiration to many, including myself, and I extend my deepest condolences and prayers to Dr. Ronald J. Fowler, Mrs. Fowler's loving husband, as well as her children, Cynthia, Christine, Ron, and Florence. Ms. Fowler has certainly left a mark on the Akron community, and her memory will continue to be lifted up in prayer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had 2 special visitors, Seth and Bronson. Seth and Bronson participated in the Career Shadow Day with Tuesday's Children. Tuesday's Children formed in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks on Tuesday, September 11, 2001. They meet individuals and families of service members where they are on their grief journey, following a loss due to military service, mass violence, or acts of terrorism. This is the 5th year Seth has joined me, and the 1st year Bronson has joined me. Tuesday's Children uses its experience and expertise to help our military families work through their own losses. Seth and Bronson, I hope you enjoyed being my shadow. I sure enjoyed your visit. I can't wait to see all that you accomplish. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the exceptional achievement of the Dance City, a local dance team based in North Minneapolis, for the remarkable victory at the Star Power National Talent Competition. The dedication, talent, and hard work demonstrated by the members of Dance City have propelled them to extraordinary success on the national stage, winning them first place in hip-hop and first overall. Faced with competition from over 100 teams around the country, the Dance City girls rallied to the challenge and emerged with their well-deserved victory. The director of the Dance City and coach, Sierra Barham, created her studio to serve young Black girls in the Minneapolis community. May their success continue to illuminate the path for future generation of dancers. I could not be happier to have Minneapolis represented by these bright young women. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to represent the majority. The majority of Americans who actually pay their bills, the majority of Americans who actually believe that if they have a right, they actually have a responsibility. Unfortunately, President Biden just announced that by the stroke of his pen, he is going to forgive $39 billion in student loans this morning. Now, let me be clear. This is in direct violation of the Supreme Court's decision just 2 weeks ago that blocked his student loan forgiveness plan. But I guess the president has no respect for the constitutional authority of the Supreme Court. And apparently, he has no respect for hardworking taxpayers that are going to foot this bill. Because education isn't free, someone pays for it. Last I checked, the teachers don't work for free. It's you, the taxpayer, who actually paid your student loans that are now going to pay for somebody who doesn't want to pay their student loans. Because every American that has paid off their student loans now gets the opportunity to pay somebody else's. What comes next, Mr. President? Are you going to forgive mortgages and credit card bills? Where does this forgiveness end? Rest assured, come hell or high water, I will fight this till the end. Thank you, and I yield back.
Members are reminded that to direct their comments towards the chair. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life and legacy of a New York City icon, the Honorable Albert Vann. After 4 decades of service as a progressive New York State, New York City legislator, Councilmember Albert Vann passed away 1 year ago today. His contributions have enshrined him as a multi-generational champion of equity, justice, and for those in most need. He understood the importance of progress and the fight for justice. He understood what it meant to challenge the white male-dominated political machine of his day. He understood real power, where real power comes from. It comes from the beloved community. This led him to becoming the first president of the African American Teachers Association, the first Black Teachers Union in New York State. He was a friend, a colleague, a mentor, but most importantly, he set the standard for what it means to serve your community. To those who are privileged and underprivileged, overlooked, and left out or marginalized, it is with great honor that I stand as a direct beneficiary of a great man, Councilmember Albert Vann, a true trailblazer in New York State politics. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the National Defense Authorization Act is vital to the national security of the United States, as is border security and energy dominance. So I'm very pleased we are making strides into these areas with the passage of the NDAA and continue to strengthen and have a dominant military. This NDAA includes significant resources to counter China in the Indo-Pacific, requires the DoD to identify and mitigate land purchases near military installations, and make certain the United States continue to have the world's superior fighting force. This legislation also funds the National Guard's border security deployment mission and rejects the Biden administration's plan to shrink our U.S. Navy. This bill includes language to require allies to provide proportional levels of funding for the Ukraine conflict, alleviating the burden on U.S. taxpayers, yet fortifying the Ukraine freedom fighters. And importantly, supports our service members with a 5.2% pay increase, the largest raise in 20 years. This NDA strengthens American national security of the United States as well as the world, and I am pleased to have supported it. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. America's national defense has historically been a source of bipartisan agreement, not a battleground for divisive, extreme partisan politics. Unfortunately, House Republicans chose to use the NDAA to advance controversial and harmful amendments rather than work in a bipartisan way to bolster our national defense, strengthen our national security interests, and protect our service members. Through the amendment process, House Republicans inserted extreme anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-DEI amendments that infringe upon the rights of individuals, notably those who served in our armed forces and their families, threaten their liberties, and undermine the principles of freedom and autonomy that they work every day to defend. With these poison pills, I could not vote to advance this year's NDAA as amended. Listen, folks, I'll work tirelessly with my Senate counterparts and reasonable Republicans to ensure that damaging anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-DEI amendments are not included in the final text of this legislation. Thank you. Now I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. July 16 marks 1 year of the 988 hotline. This nationwide number is available 24/7 to provide confidential support and to Americans facing mental health, substance use, and suicide crisis. Nearly 5 million Americans have called 988 in the last year to talk to someone about an issue they face. As we celebrate this progress, we acknowledge there is more to be done. A recent poll by the National Alliance of Mental Illness found that only 17% of Americans are aware of 988. That means more than 4 in every 5 Americans are unaware of this resource at our fingertips. No one should feel alone. And whether it's strangers, friends, and foes alike, we never know what someone is going through. I'm proud to support the 988 hotline that can be a lifeline for those struggling. And I will also do my part to promote kinder communities in California's 40th district and across the nation. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to point out just one of the very troubling and extreme amendments in the NDAA. Specifically, Mr. Green's amendment, which would effectively cut all federal government support to filmmakers who distribute films in China. This amendment takes a page right out of 1950s McCarthyism, and it will devastate the film industry. It requires the DoD to create a blacklist of studios that often, by necessity, have made changes to films in anticipation of distribution in China. It would decide without any evidence necessary to withhold assistance for filmmakers who edit sexual or violent scenes to make films more appropriate for children. And further, it would ensure that these American filmmakers can no longer film on U.S. public lands or access resources paid for by American taxpayers. Filming is a First Amendment right, and this amendment attacks that right by allowing the DoD to censor content and editorial viewpoints of American films. The Green Amendment could also push film production overseas. In my home state of California, this amendment would devastate an industry that brings in $226 billion alone in jobs and economic activities. Sadly, this amendment is just one of many dangerous and extreme MAGA amendments attached to what has been a historically bipartisan bill. This amendment would hurt American industries and workers, and it does not belong in the NDAA. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, we've had a lot of debate on this year's NDAA. Our goal is simple, to strengthen and modernize our military so they can be prepared to meet any national security challenge that this great nation might face. Our House majority authored and passed a strong NDAA that prevents the radical Green New Deal policies from weakening our fighting forces. It blocks burdensome requirements on defense contractors, allowing them to focus on delivering critical capabilities for our military. This legislation also ensures that military ranges in the Gulf of Mexico remain open for necessary training programs, enhancing our troops' readiness. Additionally, it cuts funding for questionable combat vehicle electrification research programs and prohibits funds for DoD advisory committees dealing with environmental justice. I'm proud that we put forward a bill that focuses on the right priorities, safeguarding our national security and guaranteeing the continued defense of our great nation instead of woke politics. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand here today on behalf of slain Virgin Islands detective Delbert Phipps, Jr. Detective Phipps was killed in the line of duty on July 4th, 2023. He and his fellow officers rushed to the scene of an active shooting where a gunman, armed with an AR-15 rifle and bulletproof vest, opened fire. He gave his life in service to his community. My prayers and deepest condolences are to his family, his son, Demel Phipps, along with his other loved ones and fellow Virgin Islands Police Department officers. According to the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, arms trafficking is a major factor as to why the U.S. Virgin Islands, my home, has a homicide rate 9 times higher than on the mainland. The Virgin Islands does not manufacture guns, yet we have one of the highest per capita murder rates in the world. It's no secret that with open land, there is drug trafficking through our corridor. The weapons that continue to flood our shores are a byproduct of lax, if not non-existent gun laws throughout the continental U.S., particularly Florida. As the daughter of multiple generations of law enforcement officers, I understand the commitment of not just officers, but their families to protect and serve. I stand with Officer Phipps and all the Virgin Islands Police Department. You have my commitment to fight for you all. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and rise to extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is National Forest Week across this country. I encourage everybody to partake and enjoy your national forests. Our nation indeed was blessed by God with some truly inspiring natural beauty, and it's our job to preserve it and utilize it for future generations. Unfortunately, many of our national forests are under threat, not just from something the usual climate change nonsense, but actually wildfire caused by overcrowded forests, too many trees. We haven't been tending to the forest for 50 years. The federal government has refused to properly thin and manage our forests, largely because they see either lack of funding or, in a lot of cases, frivolous lawsuits preventing the work that needs to be done by extreme environmental groups. They're now overgrown, overcrowded tinderboxes. All it takes is one lightning strike, a cigarette butt, a spark from a flat tire going down a rural highway. Once they catch fire, they become infernos, such as the 1 million-acre fire I had in my district a couple years ago called the Dixie Fire. A healthy forest has about 40 to 60, 70 adult trees per acre, but we have situations where we have 500 or more trees per acre, really a recipe for disaster. We need to do better and manage our forests. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Address the body for 1 minute without objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to celebrate the service of Francisco Sandoval, a Fullerton educator honored as one of Orange County's Teachers of the Year. Francisco began teaching at Orangethorpe Elementary School over 10 years ago, where his students have ranged from kindergarten through 6th grade. He teaches with the belief that each and every student has their own set of strengths and abilities to succeed. For Francisco, he is both an educator and a caregiver for each and every one of his students. He begins every day by checking with his students on a one-to-one basis to make sure that they are doing well, both in school and at home. Thank you, Francisco, for the job you've done for each and every one of our students and for our community as a whole. Congratulations on being named as one of Orange County's Teachers of the Year. Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Speaker, permission to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Chairman Mike Rogers for his leadership for including language to improve the safety of U.S. service members in the NDAA. My provision would establish a new Joint Safety Council requirements for each military branch to develop a plan to identify corrective and preventive actions following major accidents and mishaps. Earlier this year, I introduced the Military Equipment Quality and Safety Reform Act, or MISR Act, which includes a similar mandate. My effort to improve safety and transparency in the wake of major accidents is motivated by the tragic death of my constituent F-16 pilot, First Lieutenant David Schmitz, whose call sign was MISR. Just over 3 years ago, Lieutenant Schmitz was killed during a training exercise when his ejection seat malfunctioned while he attempted a nighttime landing. Again, I thank Chairman Rogers for including this language in the bill and working to protect our men and women in uniform. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor 2 Newark firefighters who last week made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. Firefighters Augusto Augie Acabao and Wayne Brooks Jr. were some of the first responders to an incredibly devastating fire at the Port of Newark in New Jersey. With the instinct that only the men and women who proudly serve in fire departments across the country have, they went straight to the heart of the battle, encountering a scene unlike any they have ever experienced in their careers, but they never hesitated. They put it all on the line, and they made the ultimate sacrifice. They leave behind their fire department. So we must carry Augie and Wayne with us, carry on their legacies, carry on their memories, and that is what we will do. On behalf of every resident made safer by people like Augie and Wayne, we extend our deepest, ensuring they have everything they need to safely return home to their families. But today, we mourn the loss of these 2 incredible individuals. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in solidarity with thousands of my neighbors in New York's 4th Congressional District who are united in opposition to a proposed large-scale offshore energy project that, if completed, would drastically alter the landscape of several Nassau County communities. The development being advanced by the Norwegian energy company Equinor would see nearly 150 massive offshore wind turbines constructed within view of land off the coast of Long Beach in my congressional district. This project would include a landing site in the city of Long Beach where high-voltage cables would make landfall from the turbines and wind through residential areas to connect with a substation in my hometown in the village of Island Park. Residents of these communities could play host to an environmental disaster. New York officials who are keen to see this project progress, even in the face of local concern. In fact, Governor Hochul even went so far to enlist the assistance of Brooklyn lawmakers to ram through state legislation to support the project, even as local neighbors raised concerns. My neighbors rightfully have questions related to the impacts. I will stand with my neighbors and fight for the hardworking South Shore communities. We will stand tall in the face of this hostile takeover by Equinor. Equinor, you are not welcome in our South Shore communities. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of Mr. Rob Lally, a dedicated public servant and volunteer for more than 35 years. Rob Lally entered the seminary at a young age and as a deacon served in a Catholic parish and later for the Salvation Army. In 1988, Rob Lally headed to San Diego to work with the Alpha Project, a nonprofit human service organization that serves over 4,000 men, women, and children daily. Rob carried out Alpha Project's mission to empower individuals, families, and communities by providing work, recovery, and support services to people who are motivated to change their lives and achieve self-sufficiency. Mr. Lally's years of service were instrumental to the organization's mission and growth by working on and contributing to many critical housing projects. On June the 7th, 2023, Mr. Rob's life and legacy were honored at the Celebration of Life in San Diego, California. On behalf of the residents of California's 52nd Congressional District, I would like to express my deepest condolences to the family of Mr. Rob Lally. His legacy is felt. His presence will be greatly missed. He was a great man. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in recognition of our collective experience of seeing in real time the impacts of climate change unfold. This past month, we have seen temperatures rise and air quality worsen. The smoke from the recent Canadian wildfires led Michigan to issue their first ever statewide air quality advisory. Instead of being outside enjoying the Great Lakes, my constituents were filling up emergency rooms in Beaumont of Farmington Hills, struggling to breathe. These impacts are not just hitting us locally in Michigan. July 3rd and 4th saw some of the highest global average temperatures in recorded human history. That is why last year I worked so hard with my Democratic colleagues to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, the single largest investment in combating climate change. We are already starting to see the benefits coming from these federal actions. Michigan's clean energy jobs grew by 3.8% in 2022 alone. We can turn this challenge into an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, our 21st century moonshot. Create jobs, renovate, address, be resilient. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and to provide extended.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to recognize the 110th anniversary of the Alamo Iron Works strike in San Antonio, Texas.
Back then, those organizers were fighting for better wages and working conditions like workers are today, and started a tradition of labor strikes in the summer in the city of San Antonio. 20 years later, in 1933, the Think Cigar strike began when 400 young Mexican-American women went on strike for better working conditions and won. Then, in 1936, garment workers at the Dorothy Frocks Company in San Antonio struck for higher wages, went to jail that August of 1936, and still won. Then the next summer in 1937, 80 workers at the San Antonio Laundry Company walked off the job, demanding a 9-hour workday instead of 14 hours, and won. So remember, when right-wing extremists pass anti-worker bills, they're arguing that their bills are trying to take us to the good old days of Texas past. But we know the truth. The history of San Antonio, the history of Texas, is a history of workers organizing and winning. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was disappointed in the recent debate we had here dealing with the National Defense Authorization Act. It was culture war instead of national security. But the biggest failure, I think, was the inability to address our nuclear weapons policy. We couldn't even eliminate one outmoded bomb. We couldn't allow the reevaluation of our land-based intercontinental ballistic missile system, even though they've been plagued by rampant corruption, cheating, drug use. Sadly, Congress continued to avoid the issue of nuclear deterrence. How many times do we have to destroy a country before they are discouraged in attacking us? How many billion dollars need to be wasted in piling on additional nuclear weapons that pose threats in and of themselves? This is a question that the American people deserve Congress to address. Sadly, this legislation continues to ignore the issue.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to spotlight James Bond, a native of Halifax County and the first African American from the North Carolina Army National Guard Aviation Branch to become a lieutenant colonel. Lieutenant Colonel Bond has held many assignments in aviation, including 2 company commands, and was selected as the battalion commander of the 130th Attack Battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Bond is a graduate of Halifax County Community College and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he was commissioned through the Reserve Officer Training Corps and Branch Aviation. He understands the next generation of Eastern North Carolinians must get involved to achieve the American dream, particularly through public service. Mr. Speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Bond's service to our country and dedication to the next generation does not go unnoticed. And we salute him for his continued loyalty and commitment to the American people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9, 2023, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Maybe we should start earlier. Why don't you just let me have this? Yes, sir. Okay. And would you take these 2 over here, please? Yes.
And still I rise, Mr. Speaker. And still I rise. Borrowing the words of Maya Angelou, bringing the gifts my ancestors gave, I am the dream and hope of the slave, and still I rise. I rise as a scion of the enslaved Africans who were sacrificed to make America great. Sacrificed for some 200 plus years, 240 plus years to make America great. I rise because I understand that as a scion and as a descendant, I have a duty, a responsibility, and an obligation to those enslaved people. I think my colleague John Lewis put it best. You just have a responsibility to get into good trouble. Good trouble was his term. I added the verbiage. But we have this duty and responsibility to get into good trouble, to do that which is appropriate, to honor the enslaved people who are the foundational mothers and fathers, the economic foundational mothers and fathers of this country, the foundation upon which this economy resides to this day was put in place with sacrificed lives, millions of sacrificed lives, millions, literally, over centuries, literally, to make America the great country it is. Unfortunately, America, the country I love, the country where I sing the national anthem, I salute the flag, I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I stand for the national anthem. The country I love has not shown respect for the people who gave it its economic foundation. As a matter of fact, we've shown disrespect for them. Disrespect. They have not been honored. They have been pushed aside, left behind. As a matter of fact, there has been an effort to cause people to literally be ashamed of talking about these foundational mothers and fathers. We revere the enslavers and we revile the enslaved who were sacrificed, whose lives were sacrificed, many of whom were born into slavery, lived their lives as slaves, and died as slaves. We don't honor them appropriately. Well, some of that is changing because of what the Honorable John Lewis called to our attention about good trouble. Some of that is changing because last year, this Congress passed legislation for Slavery Remembrance Day. We did so on July 27th of last year, Slavery Remembrance Day. It was a historic, monumental accomplishment for Congress. But you didn't read about it in the newspapers. You didn't see it on television. You didn't hear anything about it on radio. It wasn't celebrated in social media. This country does not respect the enslaved people. The country I love, the country where I salute the flag, say the Pledge of Allegiance, stand for the national anthem. None of that was broadcast because there is a desire among many to have those who are the scions, the descendants, to have them forget slavery, to forgive and forget. Well, it's obvious that the scions have forgiven. Yes, we forgive, but God gave us memory for a reason. We don't forget. We don't forget Pearl Harbor, and we have a Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. We don't forget 9/11. We have a 9/11 Remembrance Day. We are not going to forget, and we should never forget the Holocaust. And we have a Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we don't forgive and forget. We should forgive and remember. Forgive and remember. That's what we do for 9/11, bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7th. That's what we do for the Holocaust. We remember, and we should. So as I stand here, a scion, a proud person who commemorates, Slavery Remembrance Day. It's not a day for celebration, it's a day for commemoration. We are approaching the next Slavery Remembrance Day, and I thought it appropriate to do several things. The first is to acknowledge Mr. Steny Hoyer. Mr. Steny Hoyer gave me his word, and he kept his word. He gave me his word. He indicated that we would pass Slavery Remembrance Day legislation in this House, and we did. And we did. We did it, as I indicated, on July 27th of 2022. I'm eternally grateful to Mr. Hoyer for what he committed to do and for what he followed through on. In fact, he did it. So thank you, Mr. Hoyer. I will forever appreciate you for this and many other things that you did as a majority leader. I respect greatly the many things that you have done, but I don't respect any of them more than what you did to help us inculcate Slavery Remembrance Day into the national fiber and fabric of this country. I greatly appreciate it. And I will be thanking you not only today, but also in Houston, Texas. In Houston, Texas, on August the 19th, when we will have our second annual Slavery Remembrance Day event. Second, August 19th, Houston, Texas. Our speaker will be the Honorable Bishop Barber, who is well known for his oratory and his intellect, a preacher par excellence, pulpiteer par excellence, a person who, without question, is making a difference in the lives of poor people. He's engaged in a campaign to help poor people. August 19th, Houston, Texas. Open to the public, I might add. First 1,000 people. Last year we had 1,000 people in attendance. We expect to have 1,000 people this year. We intend to continue with Slavery Remembrance Day events, not only in Houston, but across the length and breadth of the country. There are other scions who understand that they are bringing the gifts our ancestors gave, that they are the dream and hope of the slave. Some of them will pick this up, and they too will have Slavery Remembrance Day events. The actual day for Slavery Remembrance Day to have the most commemoration is going to be the 20th, August the 20th, because it was on August the 20th of 1619 that the White Lion, a ship, docked at a place called Point Comfort near what we now call Norfolk, Virginia. And when the White Lion docked, it had 20 or so, not sure the exact number of persons of African ancestry, who were traded for goods. And they became the first Africans to become enslaved in the colonies. I understand that there are other circumstances that predate August 20th, 1619, but this happened with the colonies. And it was the colonies that, in a sense, probably don't like to say it, but it's true, popularized slavery, popularized it, legitimized it, made it comfortable, made it acceptable, made it a part of the vernacular, made it a part of everyday life. It was the colonies, American colonies. They gave us slavery as an institution in this country for hundreds of years. So on August the 20th, we will be commemorating Slavery Remembrance Day. Remember, we're having this breakfast and ceremony on the 19th, but on the 20th, we will take it to houses of worship. And in these places of worship, we will have commemoration ceremonies. Last year, we were at Bishop Dixon's Community of Faith Church, to be called the Cathedral now, the Cathedral of Faith in Houston, Texas, and we will have another commemoration ceremony there. We will have commemoration ceremonies in other churches. We want to have them across the length and breadth of the country. We will get there. It's not going to be easy, but we will do it. This is what you do. This is, for many people, trouble, but it's the kind of good trouble that John Lewis called to our attention. Good trouble. I'll always remember how he and I were in good trouble together. We were arrested multiple times together, and we literally were in jail together. I respect and will always allow his spirit to manifest itself such that it can be a guiding light and force in the lives of people, and hopefully will continue to be one in my life, the desire to be in good trouble. I have followed through on this good trouble mission, and I have had the opportunity to make good trouble in honor of the Honorable John Lewis as it relates to voting rights. And this is a part of the process of honoring the enslaved people, as a matter of fact, this good trouble, honoring them by getting in good trouble to advance the rights of all people, which would include them. The voting rights, for example, is an act of good trouble, not just for my contemporaries, not for the people who will benefit from it now, but to show that we respect what the ancestors suffered and never had the right to vote. They suffered. So they would expect that someone such as an Al Green who makes it to Congress, they would expect that he would try to make a difference and acquire the rights for others that they never had. I'm honored to tell you that I was before the Supreme Court, and this was a few years back. I was before the Supreme Court, and I have the proof of it here. This is the citation that I received on August the 9th of 2021. August is a significant month, it seems, in my life. But we were arrested there, and I made a commitment. After we were arrested, not put in jail, wasn't that type of arrest this time. When I was arrested, they placed this ban on us, and this was something to indicate that we had been arrested, and we had to post bail, and I paid a fine, did not go to a place of incarceration. But my commitment was to wear this band. This is the same band that was placed on me on August the 9th of 2021. Same band. And I've committed to myself to wear this until we pass the Voting Rights Act here in Congress. And I've had many to tell me that I may be wearing it a long time. I've been wearing it now for some years, it seems. But I don't think that I can wear it too long, because the right to vote has been denied people for too long. And as a scion of the enslaved people who never had the right to vote, this is the least I can do to show the world that I'm serious, to the extent that one can do so with a wristband that symbolizes a commitment to justice for all in the form of voting rights being protected for all. I want to assure people that we will continue with this conscious agenda. This Slavery Remembrance Day is but one aspect of the conscious agenda. The conscience agenda, which is to my left, is one that we are going to promote, and it is a part of the legislative agenda here in Congress. That legislative agenda will be talked about on August the 19th in Houston, Texas, when we have this 1,000 or more people in attendance at this event, the Slavery Remembrance Day breakfast. We are going to talk about the legislative agenda. The legislative agenda includes expanding Slavery Remembrance Day. We will expand it across the length and breadth of the country, as I articulated a little bit earlier. The legislative agenda will include awarding a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved. We have, in 1956, here in this Congress, accorded a Congressional Gold Medal, 1956, Congressional Gold Medal to Confederate soldiers. Confederate soldiers. Confederate soldiers, for edification purposes, are the people who fought to maintain slavery. The Congress of the United States awarded a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslavers, but not to the enslaved, not to the people who are the foundational mothers and fathers of this country, the people who suffered and who were sacrificed. Their lives were sacrificed so that we would have this opportunity to stand in the well of the house and say, America is a great country. It is, but it's great for a reason. The reason is sacrificed lives, millions of them. If we in this Congress can accord a Congressional Gold Medal to Confederate soldiers, surely we can accord a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved people whose lives were sacrificed to lay the economic foundation upon which this nation resides today. A Congressional Gold Medal is a part of the conscience agenda. And you'll note we have that at the top of this display, conscience agenda. It is our moral imperative. This is our moral imperative, this conscious agenda, our moral imperative. That means it is something that we have to do because it is not only the right thing to do, it is the righteous thing to do. This is a righteous movement. This is righteous legislation. This is not your typical legislation. This is the legislation that addresses a seminal moment in time that changed the rest of time in this country, and that moment in time was August 1619. August 20th, 1619. Changed the history of this country forever. In an unpleasant way for a good many people, I might add. People of color. So this is a part of it, awarding a Congressional Gold Medal. We have legislation that we have filed in the House of Representatives to accord a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved people. The next piece of legislation on the conscience agenda, that inner thing within us all that says this is a right thing to do, that we should respond to. And this is a response. This is a response from a scion of the African people who were enslaved and sacrificed to make America great. The next item on the agenda, for those who may not be aware, many are, the message is getting out, is the removal of Richard Russell's name from the Senate Russell Office Building. Pardon me while I pick up my poster on this issue. This is a poster that depicts the Russell Senate Office Building. A building paid for with tax dollars. Tax dollars. Not only is it paid for with tax dollars, It is maintained and sustained with tax dollars. The Russell Senate Office Building. Richard Russell was a bigot. I'm speaking truth. Richard Russell was a racist, a white supremacist. Richard Russell was one of the authors of the Southern Manifesto. Richard Russell fought anti-lynching legislation. Richard Russell fought civil rights legislation. Richard Russell has earned a place in infamy, and his name should not be associated with the Russell Senate Office Building. Excuse me. It should not. His name should be immediately removed from the building. The building itself is a symbol of national shame. I don't go in the Richard Russell Office Building. I'm a one-person protest. I don't go. I respect myself enough not to go into this building. And I guarantee you, if this building were symbolic of some other things associated with Anglo-Americans, they wouldn't go in it. They respect themselves enough not to disrespect themselves by going into a building that was antithetical to their best interests, that had the name of some person who was antithetical to their best interests. That's what they do. So I'm not doing anything that my Anglo-American friends wouldn't do if the shoe were on the other foot, to borrow a phrase. Unfortunately, the Senate has not found it within its wisdom to change the name. I have heard that the reason the name has not been changed is because they can't agree on another name. And there have been efforts to try to do it, but couldn't agree on a name. I have a solution. There's a way to resolve this question of the name change. We resolve it by doing this. Let it revert to the name that it had prior to becoming the Russell Senate Office Building. That name was the old Senate Office Building. Let it revert to the old Senate Office Building. Take as much time as needed to select a new name. I have no name that I'm recommending. I'm not doing this to give it a name. I'm doing this to have this name removed. I'm doing this because this is good trouble. This is the kind of trouble that the ancestors expect a scion to engage in. This is the good trouble, the kind of trouble that John Lewis engaged in when he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. This is good trouble. I don't mind getting into good trouble. And it's good trouble to say that the Senate ought to be ashamed for allowing this to persist, knowing that it is an affront to African Americans. They know it, but we're not that important. Our vote is, but we're not that important. They don't have to respond to us immediately. Take their time. It is a very difficult circumstance to negotiate when people who are not directly impacted by something that is an affront to others, when they have the authority to set the timeline, when they can determine when it's best to do that which is going to benefit people who are finding a circumstance unpleasant and unacceptable. They don't have to rush. Doesn't impact them, many of them. It does impact one or two who are there in the sense that they are descendants. But I'm a proud descendant. And I'm not ashamed to say that the Senate ought to be ashamed for what it is doing and allowing this to continue. It just seems like in this country, where we get exposure for everything that's under the sun, that this would get the kind of attention it merits. The press knows, they do, but they're not taking any action. Sometimes the press can be there to maintain the status quo. I have no ideas of why, but that's what's happening as a result of the inaction. Status quo is being maintained. And we need not kid ourselves. If this received the media attention that it richly deserves and will not receive, apparently, this would change. It would. The name would come off of the building. The Senate has shame on its face for allowing this to persist. The conscience agenda. Another aspect of this agenda is the enacting of Securities and Exchange Atonement. Let me explain. I was afforded the preeminent privilege of being the chairperson of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations for the full Committee of Financial Services. And as such, we held hearings. We held a hearing and we had some of the top banks in this country present. And we made inquiries about their association with slavery by and through their predecessor institutions. Well, confessions were made. Predecessor institutions of big banks, before they became as big as they are now, they engaged with slavery. Banks were lending money so that people could buy human beings and shackle and chain them into slavery. And banks would repossess their property. They were chattels by definition at the time. Human beings as chattels. These are the foundational mothers and fathers of the country in chains. They were repossessed. If the person who received the loan to purchase the slaves didn't make his payments timely, the slaves were repossessed. Just as you would repossess an automobile or a car, some piece of property, inanimate object, they were repossessed. Banks. And the question was posed to them, these are the captains of industry. These are the people who make millions of dollars a year. The question was posed to them, have you done enough to atone? And not in those exact words. And they all gave an indication that they could do more. That they could do more. And then the question was asked, well, can you give us a plan for doing that something more? Not one had a plan or was prepared to say they would even present a plan. The insurance companies, big insurance companies, got their start, some of them dealing in slavery. That wasn't the only thing, but it was a part of their portfolio at the time. These big companies insured the slaves, and when a slave died, then there was a payment of funds, just as you would insure a cow and some other animal. Human beings treated with less respect than you would give a cow in many cases. The enslaved people, the foundational mothers and fathers, economic foundational mothers and fathers, who laid the foundation such that I can stand here and say, America's a great country. Great because of their lives that were sacrificed. And I say it sincerely, America is a great country. But we have to add, because of the ancestors who were enslaved for centuries so that America could have the free labor to help it become the economic powerhouse it is today. So we need to have a means by which we can find out just to what extent all of these companies, major companies, engaged in some way with slavery. And there should be atonement. We didn't demand that they atone in some specific way. The specificities, we allowed them to negotiate within themselves. But so far, we've not had any action that I'm aware of. And to do something along the lines of just a few handouts here and a few handouts there and receive an applause while you're getting your millions and millions of dollars as a salary, that's not enough. That is not enough. And I can call some names of people who think that they've done great things while receiving those big salaries and done very little to atone for what their predecessor institutions have done. Securities and Exchange Commission, Securities and Exchange Atonement, more appropriately stated. And finally, on this agenda, which we will talk about on August the 19th in Houston, Texas, with 1,000 people assembled, we will talk about all of these and one additional. This is the good trouble that you get into when you are a scion and you respect yourself. The establishing of the Department of Reconciliation. Establishing the Department of Reconciliation. It is intuitively obvious to even the most casual observer that we have not atoned. We have not. And not only is atonement less than appreciated, we are finding now that, in my opinion, we are backsliding in the House of Representatives. Backsliding. Moving back. Moving backwards in the House of Representatives. We are very close in this House to having racism legitimized as a talking point, or the verbiage associated with racism legitimized as a talking point. Case in point, on yesterday, a member of the House of Representatives came to this floor and uttered what I consider a racial slur. On the floor of the House, there was an appeal to take down the words, to have them stricken. Right here on the floor of the House of Representatives. We are becoming more comfortable in this country with racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, nativism, sexism, all of these invidious isms. We are becoming more comfortable with them. And there are people who are very comfortable with them who are members of the Congress of the United States of America. We had a president who was very comfortable with these invidious phobias and isms. And that, my friends, laid the foundation for much of what we are seeing and suffering to this very day. The behavior of the person at the top will set the tone and tenor for persons up and down the line. We are suffering because of the behavior of someone that we elected to public office. We in this country are moving in the wrong direction when it comes to the progress that we should be making in terms of relationship building and living together in harmony. We are. A lot of the legislation in the NDAA evidences exactly what I'm saying. By the way, I voted against it. This Department of Reconciliation is needed. It's needed because for too long we have ignored the chasm between the races in this country. Then there is a chasm. We've ignored it. Rather than span the chasm, build a bridge such that we can all enjoy liberty and justice for all, we ignore it. And we have somehow hoped that it would just go away. If we could just let time pass, it would go away. But the passage of time in and of itself does not cause pain, hurt, and sorrow to evaporate. It's what you do with the time. And we've not used our time wisely, as evidenced by the fact that we've had all of this celebration of those who were the enslavers and literally ignoring those who were enslaved, vilifying the enslaved. We need a Department of Reconciliation. This department would be, something just came to mind. Let's pause on the Department of Reconciliation and what it would be, because I have another thought. I really think that on this, I need to amend the agenda. I need to, in honor of the Honorable John Lewis, call this the good trouble, because for a lot of people this is trouble. See, they can't stomach what we have here. The good trouble conscious agenda. I'm going to do that. The good trouble conscious agenda. Because I understand the trouble that this creates in the lives of people who want to forget and go on. But they don't do that when it comes to 9/11, Pearl Harbor, or the Holocaust. We have to remember those things, and we should. But when it comes to slavery, let's just forget that. Let's not talk about it. Forgive and forget, Al, but remember the others. Just forgive and forget the people who made America the great country it is, the foundational mothers and fathers. So as I was saying, back to our regularly scheduled program. Establishing a Department of Reconciliation, here's what this department would do. Here's what it would allow us to do. To have a Secretary of Reconciliation, just as we have a Secretary of Commerce, just as we have a Secretary of Education, just as we have a Secretary of Labor, a secretary whose job it would be to wake up every morning with reconciliation on his or her mind. And that secretary would have undersecretaries, just as we have undersecretaries in the Department of Labor, Commerce, Education, undersecretaries that would have various aspects of reconciliation to deal with. And reconciliation would be broader than the enslaved people. Reconciliation would also include others with whom we have not reconciled. We need to reconcile. We have not reconciled. And it's bigger than the enslaved people, the foundational mothers and fathers, economic foundational mothers and fathers who have made America great. It's bigger than this. There are others. This is what the Department of Reconciliation would be charged with helping us resolve. It's not going to be resolved over a year or two or the term of one president It's not going to be resolved in a few years, one decade. It's not. It's going to take time. But just as we are committed to labor issues with a department and a secretary that reports directly to the president, we can be committed to reconciliation with a department and a secretary that reports directly to the president. The Labor Department is not going anywhere. Labor issues are going to be available to be addressed, and this department will address these issues. The same with education and commerce. We have these departments. When we have specific needs, we develop specific solutions. The needs of labor are addressed through a labor department. The need to reconciliate should be addressed through a Department of Reconciliation. We need a Department of Reconciliation to address the needs of this country so that we can live together in harmony and better understand each other. An example of something that we need to better understand. In this country, Fort Bragg existed for many years. Bragg was the name of a Confederate officer. Bragg. And we changed it to Fort Liberty. I thought that was something that we should celebrate and appreciate. But now there's a movement afoot, and at least one person who's running for president has connoted that should he become president, the name will revert back to Fort Bragg. This is what we're experiencing across the length and breadth of the country, a rolling back. Remember, I said we're moving in the wrong direction. We're experiencing a rolling back of gains that were fought for, won and earned, many of them with the blood, sweat, tears, and lives of people. Fort Bragg, there's a good possibility that if a certain person becomes president, that name will be reinstated on what we now call Fort Liberty. We're moving in the wrong direction. But we're going to persist with the conscious agenda. We're going to give people the opportunity to do the righteous thing. It will be within them to make a decision as to whether the righteous thing is the appropriate thing to do. But there's nothing about this agenda that is not righteous. Slavery Remembrance Day, we have a Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, 9/11 Remembrance, Holocaust Remembrance. Nothing in the world like the Holocaust. Horrific event. Slavery Remembrance. Nothing in the world like it. Slavery was a horrific event. Crime against humanity, in fact. That's a righteous agenda item. Good trouble agenda item. Congressional Gold Medal is righteous. If we can do it for Confederate soldiers in 1956, we can do it for the enslaved people today if we chose to. That's a part of a righteous agenda. Removing Richard Russell's name, a person who fought civil rights, fought anti-lynching laws, co-authored the Southern Manifesto. That's a righteous thing to do. Not just the right thing, Senate. Senate who ought to be ashamed. Senate who won't do the righteous thing. That's a righteous thing to do. Senate leadership who won't do the righteous thing. Enacting the Securities and Exchange Atonement, we need to know about the affiliation association of these mega corporations with the institution of slavery. And there needs to be some atonement. The universe is constructed such that atonement is a part of the process of making wrong right. righting wrongs. We need atonement. And of course, to do all of this, much of it, all of this could be issues taken up under a Department of Reconciliation. As I indicated earlier, and still I rise, I am truly a scion of the enslaved people who were sacrificed to make America great. I am a good troublemaker in the spirit of John Lewis and many others. I want to be a good troublemaker. I will continue to be a good troublemaker. And still I rise, bringing the gifts my ancestors gave. I'm the dream, to paraphrase Maya Angelou. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I yield back the balance of my time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you. We won't keep you here for 60 minutes. There are a couple issues, I think, that have dominated the discussion here the last couple weeks, or should have dominated the discussion, that I think deserve a little bit of attention today. I'm going to address one more time our crisis at the southern border. I'm a little bit afraid that as the weeks and months roll on, people are being accustomed to what is going on at the southern border. But as with every tragedy that happens in our society, if a tragedy happens every week or every month, we ought to talk about it every month. Now, recently, the Biden administration changed the way we allow people from certain countries, Cuba, Haiti, one of the Central American countries, to be able to come in here. But we have to look and see how many people are crossing the southern border. And if we look, including people coming across the new administrative fashion, every month we continue to hit all-time records of people coming into the United States. The most recent month available is May. We are still waiting for the June numbers. And there we have a total of 227,000 people crossing our southern border. If we compare that to last May, it was 142,000. And if we compare it to the first May under President Biden, it was 74,000. So things are going up dramatically, but it seems as though the press is not as appropriately concerned as they should be. In other words, we are succeeding in getting them bored, the greater the concern should be. I want to point out as well that as the total number of people come across, just different subgroups continue to come up. We right now have unaccompanied minors at approximately 7,000 people. Now, recently, the New York Times reported we have lost tens of thousands of young people coming here. We have almost 7,000 people crossing the border every month, not being supervised by their parents or, quite frankly, any other adult. And the Border Patrol will tell you that sometimes if you do a DNA test, children that are coming across with people who purport to be their parents, purport to be their aunts or uncles, are not. This should be a cause of great concern here in this chamber. When children were left to spend a week or 2 weeks apart from their parents, that was considered a major concern and something we all had to bring up. But no, I believe that there is a new committee formed, and one of the things we'll have to look at is what we can do to make sure that people who are entering the United States have not one, but in most cases, both of their parents with them. It is not a good idea for the United States to be part of a system which is causing people, young people, to be separate from, in many cases, both parents, in other cases, one parent. Hopefully, we can change our policy down there a little more family-oriented, and the United States will not act as a kind of co-conspirator with the drug cartels in breaking up these families. I think it's also important that we not only check this out when people are crossing into our border, but check them out when our Department of Labor finds young people, as they do, working, maybe third shift, maybe working illegally. We had a committee hearing on this, wasn't publicized as much as it should have been, but we find the Department of Labor expresses no interest at all, as far as we can tell, when they find a child working third shift, when they find a child working in such fashion against the law. They do not look for the parents at all. And this is something that should change if the administration was all concerned about these parents. Nobody can tell me if a child was working illegally, working too late, working at too young an age, and they were an American citizen, and this were found out, the appropriate authorities would not be contacting the parents and wondering what was going on. But under the Biden administration, we don't care. And of course, you're setting up a situation of human trafficking. When you have children who are unaccompanied by parents, that is an obvious result. And we always refer to human trafficking. We should frequently, I think the phrase human trafficking is used to kind of nicen up the what's really going on, and that is prostitution. But in any event, I call on the press corps to report on the new migrants coming in the May numbers, and sometime in the next couple of weeks, we should get new numbers in June. Last year in June, we had 140,000 people cross across the southern border, and I hope the press corps takes a little bit of notice as to whether one more time we hit a record for the month. Right now, we have numbers for the first 9 months of this fiscal year. Every one of the 9 months has hit a high in the number of people coming here, at least in recent history. We will find out within a couple weeks whether we're on the 10th month in a row of record number of people coming here. The next issue that I'd like to address, and was touched upon this week in some of the diversity talk, is that with regard to the transgender issue. It's an issue I never thought we'd discuss here in Washington. It's an issue I don't think that even crossed people's minds 15 or 16 years ago. There are a variety of topics that people bring up here. Do transgenders get to use a girl's bathroom? Do transgenders get to use a girl's locker room if they're in sports? Do transgenders get to play on women's sports? But I think the most important issue, and it's one that should be more obvious, is what is society doing to reduce this problem? And what they found out in Europe is that over time, the number of transgenders go up. And if we didn't have this obvious increase in number of people, we wouldn't have anywhere near the problem in the first place. Now, why is it going up? I think the more you read, one of the reasons it's going up is this subgroup of our population is kind of held up as heroes. And I would suggest that some people interested in this topic read an article by a woman by the name of Heather McDonald, in which she discusses the transgender situation and the fact that all of the coverage in the press and all of the favorable comments from American politicians, particularly our President of the United States, referring to people who question the proliferation of the transgender movement, says they are motivated by hate and fear. I don't know anybody who's hating anybody. I do think there are people who feel sorry for these people. But obviously the number is increasing the more politicians and the news media pays attention to this subgroup and makes them out to be some sort of heroes. It gives people attention, and of course all young people like attention, and it gives people a sense of belonging, a sense that they're part of a cause. And of course young people like to be part of a rebellion of some nature, but the people who are being hurt by this more than anybody are of course the people who would not have gone down this path but are going down this path, and it is brought to people's attention more and more. This is a group that was nowhere near as common in this country in the past, and quite frankly, I do not believe this is common in other non-westernized countries. But that is because in these non-westernized countries, it is not discussed as something that we ought to do. Now, I recently met with a young lady who was convinced that the reason she was unhappy is because she really should have been a boy. She now credits it entirely to looking on the internet, where they told her if she was unhappy, and many, many young people are unhappy, they told her the reason she was unhappy is perhaps she should be a boy. So they took this young lady, and at the age of 12 or 13, they gave her powerful puberty blockers, they gave her testosterone, and eventually they removed her breasts. She, of course, came to regret it. I don't know what sort of doctor would look at a 15-year-old knowing very well that people's opinions and ideas of the world change so dramatically between 15 and 20 and 25 and 30, and decided to do something as irrevocable as remove this young gal's breasts. But this is happening all the time in this country. This gal was from another state, but I know of 2 hospitals in Wisconsin who would make this dramatic change to somebody. They wouldn't, I don't know why, money, I can't imagine. They wouldn't say, why don't you come back when you're 23 or 24 and we'll talk to you then. Probably wouldn't be a good idea then, but to a 15-year-old? But again, the reason she did it is she got a lot of affirmation on the internet, people encouraging her, people telling her she's a hero, people telling her that she should be so proud of herself if she was going down this route. I think it would be good if we would start in this chamber among politicians here, and hopefully even the president, and stop encouraging people that this is an option. By the way, if people have these surgeries, they have to continue to take medications costing a great deal every month. If it were really true that this gal should have been a boy, she wouldn't have to continue to take medications even after she had the surgeries. But she's would have to take these medications for the rest of her life. I hope in the future people in this chamber are a little bit more measured in their words before they imply to people that they are some sort of special heroes by getting their sex changed. So in any event, these are 2 topics that I think I'll say the other side has not been brought up the degree to which it should be by the mainstream media, and not brought up enough by my colleagues. So I hope when we return from our break over the weekend that these issues are brought up a little bit more in the future. Thank you.
Does the gentleman have a motion?
We're moving adjournment.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Monday next for morning hour debate.